Welcome to Narrative Responsibility, a podcast about examining the meta-story of your life, how well it is serving you, and how to change it for the better. I'm Elena Wolf, relationship coach and life alignment mentor, and this is this week's New Perspective. Hi there! I'm so glad you're here today. This is episode 27. Let the universe be your DM. So, for those of you who don't already speak tabletop gaming, DM stands for Dungeon Master. Sometimes this is also called GM, which is, I think, Game Master. Essentially, this is the person who kind of writes the storyline and sets up the obstacles that the players are going to encounter on their quests. And this is obviously a role that is separate from being a player in the game, but totally necessary for the players of the game. It's the person that keeps the game plot unfolding and moving forward by putting obstacles in the path of the players, and sometimes even by giving objectives to the players. Like, you are offered a choice between these two quests. Which one do you want to undertake? Well, who's offering you those quests? I mean, ostensibly, maybe they're coming from, the Council of Elves or the Mayor of the Shire, but really they're coming from your Dungeon Master or your Game Master. So that's what the title refers to. And I thought this would actually be a really fun topic today. It's April Fool's Day as this episode is being released. And what better way to celebrate Fool Day than by talking about times when we have to essentially embody the Fool card in the tarot and step forward with trust in the plan that will unfold as our feet meet the path, but not necessarily having a whole lot of knowledge about where we're going or how we're going to get to where we're going, even if we know. So I'm going to set up this analogy with a little bit more context for RPGs and how the games are actually played, and then talk about how we can use that understanding to think differently about our own lives and the choices that we are offered for when and how to act. Okay, so in the context of tabletop games and RPGs, there are different types of gameplay. Some of the games are designed in basically a linear fashion. That is, there's a particular story that is being unfolded, and the characters will have maybe some influence over the events of the story and the specifics of how that story plays out, but essentially there are pre-written beats in the story that are going to be forced to happen to the players one way or another. There is, in contrast to this kind of linear style of storytelling, what's considered an open sandbox type of story, where basically there's a world and there are components that players can go interact with, and there's maybe some treasure to be gotten or maybe some little soft quests, but it's not one big story that's being told. It's basically just kind of a choose your own adventure, go have some fun, kids. And there's also some games that are in between that have an overarching story, but also have plenty of space for side quests. And we don't feel like doing a big campaign this week. We're just going to go F around and have some fun, and everything in between all of these stages. What does that remind us of? Could that be somewhat correlated to our controlling, envisioning, emerging columns, where controlling is going to be, yes, that linear story, and emerging is going to be that open sandbox, and envisioning is going to be somewhere in between? So another really important aspect for a successful experience with a game like this is having trust between the players and the DM. The reason this is so important is that the players have to trust that their dungeon master is taking them somewhere that they actually want to go. They have to trust that the dungeon master is going to give them experiences that allow them to accrue the experience points they're looking for in order to develop their characters and level them up. Not all campaigns are going to give the same kind of experience points. If a character is a fighter and they get experience points in various aspects of fighting that can make them a better fighter or a more effective fighter, they can level up as a fighter, but the DM keeps creating campaigns that are all built around diplomacy and solving problems, like solving puzzles, then that's not going to be a lot of opportunities for the fighter to level up as a fighter. Those are going to be ineffective and unsatisfying campaigns because their character might be going along for the ride, but they're not going to be really progressing or expanding. And part of the rapport that is also necessary is for players to give the DM something that they can work with. That means having personality traits, having likes, having dislikes, having specific tools or behavior patterns that they tend to gravitate to, having objects that they always pay attention to or always, feel motivated to pursue acquiring, so that the dungeon master can use some of those symbols or motivating factors to guide the player toward the experience that the dungeon master is kind of imagining for them and hoping for them to have, to get like the full experience of this story, this game that has been created. And the role of the dungeon master also requires them to respect the autonomy of the players. That is, to allow them to make meaningful choices that do affect how the game plays out, and that allow the characters to experience their own sovereignty. Like encouraging a character to go off on a quest because it involves dragons and this character has an obsession with dragons, that's simply enticing them. It's not the same as forcing a dragon into the plot line, no matter which choice the character made. And again, part of the respect between the DM and the players is that the players are being given opportunities to level up their characters, to grow their characters in meaningful ways. It doesn't always have to be in the ways that they're expecting. It doesn't always have to be in the ways that if you ask them in conversation, what do you want, that they're going to say they're looking for. There is room for surprises and opportunities that they didn't expect or wouldn't have looked for, but it's still genuine opportunities that benefit the development of their character and the evolution of their character in the end. So I'm going to set down the RPG talk and analogy for a little bit and frame how humans tend to go about the overall campaign of our life. Like, how do we go about deciding on or shaping or playing out our life story? Here are some of the really common strategies for how we kind of pick our life and how it's going to go. The first is following a script. And this is maybe not like a literal script that tells you what to say, but it is a metaphorical script that kind of tells you this is what a real life looks like. This is what adulthood looks like. It looks like a job in this field, that field, or that field. And it looks like a spouse and a dog and 2 kids and a house, or whatever it is in your culture or in your family that tells you these are the external markers of a complete life, of a well-lived life, of being adult. And an awful lot of people kind of default to following a script that was given to them by their family or by their culture or some combination of the two. Another strategy is having tunnel vision on an egoic desire, such as I'm going to be an actress or I'm going to be a doctor or something like that, and just going after that specific dream or that specific goal no matter what it costs you, and maybe without really stopping along the way to think if this is still making you happy or if this is really what you want. You're just, that goal, you're going for it, the end. Another strategy is wanting to control as many variables in life as possible because that creates a sense of safety or stability that maybe you didn't have. And so this might mean following a script. It might mean more things like not moving away because you know what life in this town looks like and you can control a whole lot of variables and you'd rather just stay here. Or maybe it looks like not putting in for that promotion because you don't know what your life looks like if you get it, but you do know what your life looks like here and you're just going to keep it here because you know how to handle this. And so maybe you end up controlling your options in order to control the variables. You can have no particular vision for your life and be pretty open for what life brings you, but you're also just kind of drifting. And finally, you can have no vision, but also be very shut down to change. And that's kind of living life in a survival mode. And again, you can probably correlate some of these to different parts of our growth alignment chart. Some of them are going to be more controlling, some of them are going to be more envisioning, some are going to be more emerging, but I hope you can recognize the theme here is actually more about these are strategies that reflect a growth avoiding kind of mentality where you're either consciously or unconsciously restricting your choices and the things you're willing to see as possible for yourself because you're trying to avoid the unknown in one way or another for one reason or another. But what often happens if we follow one of these strategies is that we lose faith in the game. We lose trust in whoever is playing Dungeon Master. And why is that? Well, if we're following a script, we might discover that we did everything the script called for and still found ourselves unhappy and unsatisfied with our life, possibly even experiencing harm because we're living totally out of alignment with our own values or maybe our own personality needs. We might go hard at our egoic desire and even get it, and then find that it doesn't satisfy us, that we are unhappy having attained it. And what do we do now? How do we justify to ourselves the time and the expense of maybe money, maybe energy, maybe lost opportunities that got us to this place, and now we don't even want to be here? We might wake up one day and feel like we've just wasted our life, kind of drifting from thing to thing rather than building something or using that time to deliberately learn or test our limits. Obviously, none of these are good endpoints. These are not spaces that are going to be comfortable to find ourselves in, but why is it that getting to one of these places is going to make us lose faith in the game or lose trust in the architect of the game? Well, that's because it proves that there was a disconnect between our expectations and reality. Or maybe a better way to say this is that there was a disconnect between the rules that we were told would lead to a particular outcome and then the outcome that those rules actually led us to. We feel lied to. We feel betrayed. I did everything that I was supposed to do, and it didn't work. What am I supposed to do now? How do I believe any other set of rules that I'm given? Because the first ones, those were lies. They didn't get me what I wanted. Those moments when we hit the end of the line with it and kind of lose hope in doing the same thing another time, that is actually when we can really open to the idea of having a DM that is more of a higher power. I don't necessarily think this has to be interpreted as like a god or deity type of higher power. You could view it simply as an a-conscious force, maybe something like gravity. You know, gravity has its operating rules that are based in physics, and the natural world obeys them. So maybe there are simply rules to how the human consciousness unfolds that you are going to be subject to, I am going to be subject to, and they are different from what's in the script. They're different from what the ego wants. But if you can understand those forces and those rules, then you can work with them. And obviously, there's a whole lot of space in between those two concepts, from, you know, orchestrating all-knowing higher power, deliberately interfering with your life, to kind of a-conscious, amoral forces of energy. Somewhere between those two edges, there's going to be a dungeon master for you. There's going to be a DM that you can trust to create a story that is worth your time and your energy and your presence to live out. That said, there is probably also going to be a rocky road before you actually create the necessary trust with this universe as your DM in order to really lean into it, surrender to these forces, and just play the game without your ego trying to get back in the driver's seat and control the story. Why? Well, sometimes we're going to have experiences that hurt and make no sense in the moment and kind of feel like the universe yanking the rug out from under us. You know, what we might experience as a DM kind of railroading players, that is, making their choices less than fully autonomous or less than meaningful in order to get a specific outcome. And if we experience something that feels like that, it can be a lot harder to trust this universe, right? Humans build trust by having safety between us. When other people respect us, respect our autonomy, respect our values, respect our boundaries, that makes them feel safe. When other people are consistent, like they show up regularly in our lives and they show up in similar ways, that makes them feel safe. When people have congruency, that is, where their words and their actions match each other. So what they say they're going to do is what they do. What they say they value is what their actions prove that they value. Like, those are the things that make trust grow and build between two people. But those are not necessarily the things that make trust grow and build between a person and the universe. Because there's this conflict between our protective ego and what is necessary for our highest good, or our path of greatest growth potential. Our ego, especially when it's operating in a protective mode, wants to keep us safe. It wants to keep us from hurting. And so sometimes that means choosing something that's familiar, even if it's mediocre or possibly even bad, instead of something that we don't know, that's an unknown. It might be very good, but it's an unknown. It's not guaranteed. It can pull us back from wanting to take a risk because we don't know what the outcome will be. If you choose not to act, you know the outcome. Sometimes that feels safer. So that's why the relationship between two people who both have their limited human perspectives and also have to cope with their own protective human egos, like, they develop trust in a different way than how a human and the universe is going to have to develop trust. Because sometimes, whether we want to admit it or not, whether we like it or not, sometimes the painful thing turns out to be a good thing. Maybe it turns out even to be the best thing. That doesn't mean it was not incredibly painful. That simply means that in the end, it brought us to something that was better than we would have had without that painful experience. Sometimes we find out later that it wasn't just that going through a painful experience, a loss or a rejection brought us to something better, but maybe also it helped us avoid something that would have been really bad. What are some examples? Didn't get that job that you really, really wanted, and then you found a better one. Or you didn't get that job that you really, really wanted, and then 6 months later, that company got bought out and your position was made redundant. So if you had gotten that job, you would have gotten laid off 6 months later anyway. So sometimes there's situations like that. Sometimes, it might be a thing where our crush doesn't like us back, and then we find somebody who is actually better suited for us. Or our crush doesn't like us back, and then we find out later that they were actually kind of a terrible person. And while it might have hurt for them to not like us or reject us, in the end, we're kind of glad they didn't. Like, whew, dodged a bullet. So, yeah, I think how we actually build trust with the universe is more when we have experiences that turn out to be for the best, regardless of how those experiences feel in the moment. Because, sometimes good things are going to happen and they're for the best and they're amazing. Thank you, universe. Those moments are awesome. And sometimes things happen that don't feel good, but turn out to be for the best. Thank you, universe. Didn't feel great, but you had my back. You were keeping me safe from something that, I didn't understand was bad. You got me. We build faith in this dungeon master that we're kind of playing along with when we can recognize outcomes as being for the best, being for our highest good, or really being catalysts for growth, regardless of how we felt about them in the moment. So this goes back to the second episode where my friend was talking about, I don't know if it was worth it until I get to the end. I think to some extent, all of us have that experience with this campaign that we're playing out with the universe as our dungeon master. Was it worth it? Well, let me get to the end and I'll tell you. So what are some of the benefits that happen once we can start trusting the universe as our DM and sort of letting experiences prove to us that they're for the best? Well, we can discover capacities in ourselves that we might not have found if we just followed our own egoic scripted path, wherever it came from. We might learn that our limits are not, in fact, where we thought they were. They're much further out, and that helps us expand in all areas of our life to know that, actually, I have a much higher threshold for discomfort or stress or risk than I had ever thought. We gain self-trust as we see ourselves handling hard things. And that kind of self-trust actually leads us to have more confidence in the world because we now have proof of our own resilience and our own resourcefulness in hard times. And frankly, if we get proof of interference or guidance that comes to us from our DM, that can actually be a real comfort in times when we have lost our own way. And that brings up a question that I think is worth addressing. Who is the ultimate architect of your life? Is it you, or is it your dungeon master, the universe? I think the best way to look at this is to view the universe as a compass or a map. As players, we are still the ones choosing what we're going to do. We're still the ones taking action. And our choices and our actions are really what build our life and the opportunities that we have. And they also help us build our sense of self. So the Dungeon Master in this kind of context is providing the right situations for us to gain a certain type of experience. And like we want those XP points so we can level up in certain ways. But first of all, we still have to take the opportunities when they're presented to us. And second, we're, in all honesty, probably only going to take the opportunities that actually match our personal goals and desires. So, like in a very literal way, we're architecting our life because we don't take every single opportunity that's given to us. We can't. There would be, like, literally, there's no way to do that. And so the opportunities that we even notice, why do we notice them? Like, the universe can't force us to notice opportunities. All it can do is drop hints and show us things with symbols that it knows we react to and say, hey, look at this. Let me draw your attention over here. And now you get to choose whether you're going to do this or not do this. And yes, sometimes it does force things through. And sometimes those might be lessons. Sometimes those might be inevitabilities, like it's just part of the story that we're playing out, that we have to develop this capacity. We have to become this kind of person. And maybe there's 100 different pathways that could take us there, but there is no avoiding that place. Now, that said, I want to be really, really clear that I personally do not believe that every hard thing we experience in life is because of fate or the Dungeon Master trying to teach us a lesson. I think that life is innately fraught with painful things and with dangers, and not all of them are secretly there for our own good. Some of them are just kind of the cost of being alive, the emotional price that we pay for participating in a circle of life that goes birth, growth, decline, death, and then some kind of transformation, whether we want to talk about it in metaphysical or simply physical terms, that then results in birth and the cycle starts anew. So sometimes we're going to have painful and hard things that happen because they're part of the circle of life, and it's not about a lesson. It's just, that's what happens. Another good thing to remember is that not every scenario or campaign is about you. We are playing this game of life together with other people. And, sometimes the Dungeon Master isn't railroading you. It's just another player who didn't choose the path that would have taken you forward. Romantic interests are probably the clearest example here, going back to our crush that doesn't choose us back. Well, was that the universe telling you that they weren't really an option, or was that them choosing to turn away from you? And yes, if somebody was an option and chose not you, that does affect your journey, but it's maybe not for the worse in the end. Maybe it's a neutral move and a substitution, this or something better, or maybe it actually is something better. And I guess it's also worth acknowledging that sometimes playing life like an RPG with the universe as Dungeon Master gets kind of weird. Sometimes you find yourself doing things that an older version of you would have shunned, would have hated, or just completely shut down and refused to engage with. As an example, if you had told me 5 years ago that I was going to be a shaman, this is 2024. If you told me 8 years ago, 9 years ago, that I was going to end up being a shaman, I would have laughed in your face. In fact, I had friends who suggested to me that I should look at that path, and I laughed in their face. Who got the last laugh? Oh, that would be the universe, and I guess my friend who got to say, I told you so, because I'm a shaman now. I play a drum. I write songs. I can sing, and I can make my drum sing, and together our voices can carry you to another world. I could never have predicted that development in my life, especially not where I was, 8 years ago. I would not have wanted it. I would not have planned it. But then it started manifesting around me, and I kind of had this moment of realization where my choice was to roll with it and get training, or be victimized by this aspect of myself that kept dropping into trances and having visions without my consciously giving permission for that. And you know what happened? When I actually got some training, I was able to use this practice to unlock a level of healing that I hadn't even imagined was possible, that the more kind of rational and structured forms of Western psychology could not have gotten me to. The universe brought me to what I truly needed. I'm not mad, but I can also acknowledge that it's kind of weird. So, in this case, did the universe railroad me? Was this a plot point that no matter how many different choices I made, I really couldn't have avoided? Or did I make a significant and autonomous choice to embrace this, where if I had in fact rejected it and turned away, I would have found some way to repress it again, or I would have been brought to a different kind of practice that was maybe more, measured and rational, that I could have embraced. It's hard to say. Also, it doesn't really matter, because it's crazy making to second guess all your choices like that, and to go, so far back down the tree of your choices. And I say that as someone who thinks many layers deep at all times, and I consider multiple timelines kind of at all times. And there is a point when you have thought about it enough. There's nothing to be gained by continuing to wonder. So one of the conscious choices that I have made is to trust the universe, to trust my dungeon master, and to trust myself, that I am playing the game the best I can, that I am making the best decisions that I can every time we're in a campaign, every time we're playing. And I hope that you can come to a point where you've got some trust built between you and the universe, and you can allow your life to unfold, not in a way that excuses you from responsibility, but rather in a way that allows you to actually feel like you have autonomy and sovereignty and the ability to make meaningful choices that direct your growth and your development. So that's all for this week. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you want to know more about my work as a coach, you can check out thepatternbreaker.com. You can follow me on Instagram at thepatternbreaker. You can check out my Patreon, patreon.com/narrative responsibility. And until next week, what part of your story are you going to take responsibility for?